Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. This is the Transportation Advisory Board special meeting of October 14th, 2020, and I am Nina Milligan, the chair of the board. I will call a roll so we can tell you who's here now, and we'll get into our agenda. Say your name, and you can say here. Cynthia Kress?
Cynthia Kress here.
Sujata Goyal?
Sujata Goyal here.
Tom McDonald?
Present.
Excellent. And our staff member, Stephen Padua and John Mortensen. And we have one more member we're expecting tonight, in Marisol. When she gets here, we'll clue you that she's here. We're going to change just one thing in our agenda, and that is to move the approval of the minutes to the end of the meeting right before the reports, so that we can have everybody here to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to check with the staff and see if there are any public comments this evening.
No one contacted us and no one else is online.
Okay, thank you. And then, Stephen, I think then we can go to our first agenda item, the Mobility Master Plan update. Is that correct?
Yes, just give me 1 minute to pull up my presentation.
Certainly. Thank you very much.
I apologize. It closed on me when I was turning everything on. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. All right. All right, good evening, everyone. The purpose of tonight, can you see actually the presentation before I? Okay. The purpose of tonight's meeting is for me to run through what's changed for the final draft of the Mobility Master Plan. And I'm going to go into the next steps for finalization and implementation. Could I ask, Tom, could you mute your audio, please?
Sorry, I thought I will.
So what's changed since the board last saw the master plan is that it really was completely restructured in the sense that we've moved a lot of items around and added some language for clarity on a few items. But the meat of the plan, particularly the guiding principles and the policies, have remained unchanged. The only change that we did make to the policies where we added an additional policy to the bicycle goal area to put in a little more support for electric bike infrastructure and the build out of kind of the system. And that was a suggestion that came from the Planning Policy Commission. The rest of the changes came from suggestions from the board and the city council to improve the readability, but also the flow of the plan to help people understand what we're actually trying to achieve. And we added additional language around safety and coordination with schools. And we incorporated additional language throughout the plan that iterated the need for regular updates following the pandemic, particularly around transportation funding, but also around how we're going to be implementing prioritized projects. For implementation of the plan, we have our plates actually fairly full next year. For the first half, we'll be working through the details of the Transportation Improvement Program as part of the Capital Improvement Plan development. we'll start this process in January, and the conversations will likely last until about May or June. And when we believe there's enough room on the agenda, we'll finalize the Complete Streets policy update, which we'll discuss tonight as part of our agenda. And then we'll discuss updates to the street standards. For the second half of the year, we'll turn our focus to updating the traffic calming policy and process, discuss our transit system, and have another round of street standard updates. This is something that, and the reason why we're going to be seeing the street standards quite a bit is they actually haven't been updated in about 10 years now. So they're in need of some edits. By the end of the year, we'll include regular process review for the Mobility Master Plan to determine if any updates are needed to help with implementation for the following year. Before I jump into describing what the CIP process will look like, are there any questions thus far? Okay. So to help describe what we'll be doing next year, I'm going to first start with what the CIP process looked like in 2019. We figured this would be useful for several of you since you've never actually done this before. Now, looking at the left side of the screen, this typically starts by carrying out over the previous year's transportation improvement plan. This typically includes the committed projects that have already started and includes significant city or external investments. This also includes other near-term projects that haven't started yet, but are projected to start in the next 6-year planning timeframe for the plan or for the program. And it also includes future projects that have been identified as a significant component of a future transportation system, but ultimately it remains unfunded in that 6-year timeframe, but it remains on that list. Now, moving to the right of the slides, the staff then conducts an evaluation, which typically includes updates to specific project budgets in case grant funding or some of the funding sources changes, addition of new funding sources for any of the new projects, balancing of project schedules with staff capacity, with funding opportunities as well, and then any feedback from City Council that may require any adjustments to what's in the TIP. Now, moving to the right side, following the evaluation process, a proposal will be made to City Council, and then following a few updates, the CIP is eventually adopted and used for the subsequent city budget process. This is important to distinguish between the two. So the TIP is a planning document, even though we are going into the financial components of all of our projects we're moving forward on. It's used for the actual city budget. It's not the actual city budget. And this process typically starts in March or April and ends around June. That's typically what a CIP process looks like for us. Now, what we'll look at next year is that we'll be starting the discussions actually in January so that we can include the board as part of the development process. Two things will be different in the process next year compared to what we did in 2019. Instead of taking all the previous year's TIP, we're only taking the committed projects that have investments that we need to stay committed to. We'll remove the near-term projects that haven't started yet, and then we'll also remove the future unfunded projects. When we get to the staff evaluations, we'll now add the Mobility Master Plan prioritized project list at the front of the evaluations. It's important to note that what's in the Master Plan project list is also what's in the TAP, but it's now actually a prioritized project list in accordance to how well each of the projects address the guiding principles that are in the master plan. And this will help staff justify the projects for investments, or it'll help us remove projects completely so that we can explore alternatives. So in the staff evaluation of the projects, we'll identify near-term, mid-term, and long-term projects, and include project justifications on how well the project meets what we're looking for as identified in the Mobility Master Plan. So at the January meeting, we'll talk a little more in depth about the process and the steps we'll take in 2021, and we'll be letting you know when we'll be asking for actions on any of that. Now, after this process is established next year, the next CIP process will be a little more simple. And it shouldn't take as long because we won't have to go through this process where we're having to go through each of the projects, talk about what is meeting at least the vision in the mobility master plan, or at least identified in the guiding principles. And for this future process, we'll carry over the previous transportation improvement program and make similar adjustments as we've done in the past. And because the MMP will already be incorporated as part of the TAP. Any questions on kind of the CIP process for next year? Yes.
And while I ask a question, Stephen, do you have your chat window open? I was going to suggest that board members, if you have a question or comment, maybe put a little note in like I did in the chat window so that you don't get lost when the presentation goes and you want to ask a question then. Does that work for you, Stephen? Do you have the chat?
I'm trying to actually find it.
Bottom right.
Well, it's because I'm presenting,
okay,
it actually is showing me something different. Okay.
I'll help. I'll keep an eye on chat.
I don't know if this is possible. Is it possible for me to raise my hand if I see some questions or try and get your attention? That way, if there's some questions in the chat and I could just watch it for you?
Sure. Whichever works, either John or Nina.
Okay.
Oh,
And you don't need to put your questions in the chat. Just put the fact that you have a question or a comment, and then Stephen can call on you and then have an opportunity to speak. And my question, Stephen, is, and I'm going to start it with an admission that this is complicated. I'm probably getting a little lost in all these steps, I have to admit. But in the previous slide, you talked about taking future projects off of TIP, that one. And where do they go? I kind of lost track of what happens with that list.
What we'll be doing is we'll actually be just taking that out of the previous TIP and then adding in that same project list, but it's now prioritized from the mobility master plan. So it's all the same projects, but now they've been identified in the mobility master plan with how well they're addressing the guiding principles.
Question. So the other ones that aren't prioritized, do they come out, or are they just going to be kind of like in the back pages of projects that were on the ongoing list but aren't prioritized or funded yet?
You're talking about what was in the previous TIP?
Right.
The only projects that will be carrying over from the previous TIP is actually only the ones that we've actually committed to with investments.
Oh, okay.
So everything else will come out, and we'll now start with the mobility master plan.
As a starting process forward.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. But we need to stay committed to a lot of those projects that we have investments to, so they'll stay at kind of the top of the list. Any other questions about this?
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Cynthia, and I think when you say take out, you mean sort of take them out and look at them, set them aside, and reprioritize them. You don't mean take them out as in make them go away. I presume it's an exercise.
Yes. The main thing is we're just trying to take the prioritization from the mobility master plan because it's all the same projects.
My other question, and I think we went through this, and I think the consultant talked about this, but I'm wondering if you can remind us about holes based on our, what do we call them, guiding principles? Because the prioritizing projects makes sense, but what are we missing? Did that isn't there some sort of truing up about the project list and identifying what might be missing from the project list based on our original policies and guiding principles? Because it's possible. What were you going to say, Stephen?
Well, I was going to ask, do you mean in terms of like the gaps in the system, or?
Yes, because while we're reprioritizing, I just want to make sure we're also asking what's missing, because it's a false exercise to think that the list is comprehensive and then everything that, I mean, I'm sure there's a long list far beyond what can be funded. I know there is. But the point is, were there any gaps? I know they talked about gaps in the system. Did they talk about addressing the gaps in the project list?
Yes.
I feel like we had that conversation like 9 months ago or something, didn't we?
Yes. So the the gaps in the system were actually identified as a separate project that was prioritized in the mobility master plan.
Okay, so they made their way into that list.
Yes.
So we think that we've got a list that includes everything we can think of that would address all of the things we came up with in the plan. Okay, I just wanted to be reminded of that. So it wasn't everything that carried over. And I've forgotten the number of projects that they added. Like I feel like we went through that
It was about
exercise.
50 projects.
They added them? They added 50 or there were 50 in total?
They added 50. There's a total of about 148, I believe.
Okay. I know we've been through this, but I couldn't remember that.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, yes, this is comprehensive to everything we can think of at this time. Next year, there might be new ideas that we might want to pursue or add to the list. And that'll just be the case every year as we kind of look at this and review the mobility master plan. And when we start talking about transit, there might be transit projects, more transit projects we might want to add to the list too. So it's just kind of a cycle of, start to implement, see if anything's missing, and then review what's the project list looks like. Any other questions before I move on kind of what the next steps are? Okay. So this will be quick. The mobility master plan has been added to the comp plan docket. So there is a new transportation element that's being reviewed for approval by City Council. It went to the Planning Policy Commission earlier this month for the public hearing for the comp plan docket item, and there were no issues, and so no changes were made actually at the public hearing. So it's now going to go to City Council study session in early November. We'll discuss the full package of the comp plan update, and then Council will consider adoption in early December, and that's when all of our hard work kind of gets finalized and formalized. Even though we're talking about implementation really doesn't happen until after that date. Okay. Any other questions about the mobility master plan? Was everybody able to review the new version of it? Any comments you want to make about what you were able to read into it?
Sujata, please. You're up.
This is Sujata. I really appreciate how thoughtful you guys were in taking our feedback. The new version is much more streamlined, much easier to read. It flows very nicely, and I think it really sort of conveys what we, as a committee, were, kind of wanting to see as the vision of transportation in our city. So I was really kind of blown away at how thoughtful you guys were in integrating our comments. Because you could have totally blown us off, and you didn't. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we tried to be if I can respond, and we tried to be as transparent as possible. There's that full table of list of all the comments, just so we weren't completely showing you a red line version that would have just been really difficult to read. So the table is really where we're trying to show what the changes have been kind of over time, particularly since July.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Sujata. Tom or Cynthia, do you have something, Cynthia, would you like to speak?
I was just going to say that I really liked, I want to put it on my wall, the page 13 of 259, which is an intimidating number right there, but the relationship to other plans. I first looked at that and I was a little skeptical, and I actually followed the lines and thought it was really useful. And I just thought the executive summary in general was pretty useful. And I thought it was it was well done. Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. Tom, do you have something?
I do not have any additional comments because I have not had a chance to read through the whole thing yet. So
Quite all right.
it sounds like, from what I've heard so far, that a really well job was done as far as incorporating the comments and responding to them.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good.
I would add like Sujata, the surprise and delight that I had in looking in this version of the plan. And one of the things that was a big standout for me, and it's nice that it's right up at front, is the executive summary. And with the really keeping in mind that that audience wants to get information very quickly, very simply, very graphically. I mean, the graphic work, like the page that Cynthia called out, and the others too, that gave you at a glance the spirit, the intention, the vision of where you were going to go when you get into the nitty-gritty of the plan. So I was really impressed with that and really enjoyed it. And thank you for listening to us and the City Council, who also was very interested in having the executive summary streamlined and more high level, and bumping out that the details to the other part of the plan. I think it worked really well to make that revision. And I also appreciate the tables of changes. They are easy to follow. It was a good tool. So that's all I have. Anybody else have anything else to say about the update? Okay. Are we done with that agenda item then, Stephen?
Yes. If there's no other comments or questions, we'll kind of continue forward with implementation.
Okay, excellent. Onward. The next item on our agenda is the Complete Streets Policy Update. And again, I turn it over to Stephen Padua, Senior Transportation Planner for the City of Issaquah.
Yes. Thank you. Give me 1 minute to pull it up. Okay, I'm not share my screen. All right. Can everybody see my slides all right? Okay, perfect. There we go. Thank you again. For this agenda item tonight, I'll review our work to update the Complete Streets policy and discuss next steps. The last time the board saw this was back in January this year, and then prior to that, it was September or October in 2019. So the board has seen this a few times, but it's been a while. This has kind of been a work in progress for a little over a year now. So we just wanted to give the board a little bit of a refresher and then have a discussion of what you were able to review and agenda packet. So we currently have language in our code now that was adopted back in 2008. As you see, it's very short and simple and to the point, but it is missing a lot of useful language that we could use to guide what Complete Streets actually is and how we actually want to implement it. And that's part of the reason why we want to update it. It provides the ability to enforce what Complete Streets means in our work and what we're trying to achieve. In the process to develop the Mobility Master Plan, the question on why this separate policy was brought up. And the reason why was this wasn't moved completely to the Mobility Master Plan or the Comp Plan is because it's considered best practice to actually have separate policy. And for that reason, the state and federal grants that we tend to go for reward more points when we have a separate policy on Complete Streets. And in Washington State, there's actual reward program called the Complete Streets Reward Program with the Transportation Improvement Board that rewards us for not only having this as a separate policy, but how we actually implement it too. And so this is just one of those steps to improve our ability or an eligibility for getting any of those grants. And additionally, how we use the Complete Streets policy, it influences several stages of every project that we implement. More directly, it guides what should be in the city standards and how they should be used. And this is a really good reason to move forward with a little more comprehensive update of what we want from the Complete Streets policy. As you can see, we added quite a bit. The proposal is including a lot of areas that are suggested as best practice nationally, but it also helps us more locally in how we actually want to be addressing all of this. There's especially more detail in areas of who benefits from this policy, what's prioritized from having complete streets and what we're committed to and when exceptions should be considered and how to process each of those. Something that our current policy currently doesn't really address at all. So back in 2019, when the board reviewed the one of the original drafts, this is the feedback that we received. We heard that we needed to improve the language on the users of the system. We needed to consider enforcement, and we needed to clarify what this all actually means. And so the next iteration that the board saw was back in January of this year, and the feedback that we received was related to the use of commitments, final edits to the user's definition, and incorporate additional language on Vision Zero and making sure that's strong to complement the policy that we are proposing as part of the Mobility Master Plan and the new transportation element. And the final draft that resulted from that feedback is included for the agenda packet for tonight. So what I'd like to do now is kind of have a discussion about what's in the policy. The reason why I didn't provide a red line version of it is because there really wasn't a lot of changes since the version that the board saw in January. So I figured we would just talk about it. Was everybody able to read through the new draft policy? Most of everyone? Do you want to start with questions?
Yeah, let's see. Are there any questions about what you read? And then we can discuss how we felt about what we read. But are there any clarifying questions? I have a question. When comparing the Complete Streets policy and then what has been included in the MMP, I thought I was concerned that there was overlap. There's some Complete Streets language in the Mobility Master Plan. It's not the whole thing, and it doesn't say, look at the Complete Streets policy. Why don't we just say the Complete Streets policy is a separate document, go look there?
We actually do, but I think you're right that it's not clear enough in at least at the front of the plan. It's more, I believe, in the appendices when we're talking about the different policies that the city has around transportation, and that it references the city code for the Complete Streets policy.
Yeah,
but
I would
that
say
is,
it's on page 51 of the packet, and it's a chapter, and there are 250 words here, 350 words about Complete Streets, and it seems like it is the Complete Streets policy, but of course we know it's not. So why doesn't it just say Complete Streets is not here?
oh, I see.
See what it's on page 51.
We actually started with that in one of the original drafts of the Mobility Master Plan, and the comment was that we didn't explain it enough. And so we decided to carry over more of the language from the new policy or the new proposed drop policy, so that it's more consistent, but that we can also explain it a little bit more, because there's individuals out there that are going to be reading the Mobility Master Plan and have no idea what that all means in terms of what Complete Streets are. And we thought the language that's in the draft policy explains it quite well. And so we want to maintain consistency, but I agree with you that we could actually just add a sentence there to just, in addition to explaining it all, we can also reference that the actual policy is located at this location in the city code.
Yeah, I get concerned about having two versions, and somewhere down the path they aren't maintained in a consistent fashion, and then the people that we're working with, whether it's the staff or contractors or funders or whoever, are confused between discrepancies between the two things. So yeah, I would advise making it clear where the policy is, and maybe make this language look a little more less policy-like. It's got policy paragraphs, more just descriptive, so that it wouldn't be confused as the Complete Streets policy. That would be my advice just on this, and then you could take it with your expertise and see what you think of that further. But
Sure.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Anybody
Thank you.
else? I'm seeing everybody muted. Nobody in the chat. Anybody raise your hand? Any other questions? We can go into discussion on certain elements or some parts of it that you may like to provide comments or have us discuss. Anybody ready? Sujata, do you have anything to say about it? Tom, do you have anything on your mind about the Complete Streets policy you want to contribute?
This is Tom. I don't have comments on the complete street policy at this time. I would like to have a chance to review it and get back with comments by the end of the week, if that's okay.
That's the Stevens schedule there.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, the idea with bringing this tonight was more of a refresher and also to just give the board another opportunity to take a look at it. We do eventually need to take action before we take this to city council so that the board can make a recommendation to city council on how to proceed with the new draft policy language.
When would we be taking that action, Stephen?
Right now it's proposed for the November meeting, but that's kind of a discussion item for tonight when we look at the schedule.
Okay. Cynthia, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I'm going to fess up and say I actually got a little lost in the packet, and I ended up, and I didn't give it as much time as I should, of course, but I ended up on the slides and wondering where the beef was, and then just moved on without continuing to look. And of course now I see that it's plainly here, starting on page 237 of the packet. Is there any way to just provide a hot link to the agenda? I know I see other agendas where I don't know if it's a lot of trouble, don't worry about it, but sometimes in a packet that's this big, it becomes cumbersome to find the content that we're looking for a particular agenda item. And so it might maybe help me just a little tiny bit when I'm trying to do my homework if I know where I'm looking, and a quick link that would then bounce me to the beginning of that. Because as I was looking for it, I ended up on the slides and didn't see the content, and so I don't know if that. So
37, that's what
Yes.
the definitions are. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
no. Sorry, I didn't mean 230. No, yeah, it starts on 237. Yeah.
Okay.
If you, in the email that gets sent out from the city clerk to all of us, if you go to the just the agenda, the online agenda, it actually breaks out each of the agenda items with links. So you don't have to go to the full agenda packet. You can actually just go to the online agenda, and there's links to break it up.
Do you mean the split screen?
The full-
Because I couldn't
on
figure out what the
split
split screen
screen?
is.
Yes, the split screen.
Okay, I could never. That's been a bit of a mystery for me since COVID. Like trying to figure out what split screen actually means. I don't know what else is in the other side of the screen.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. Okay, yeah.
But I see now that you're saying view draft policy. Okay. I didn't understand what what is a split screen? Can somebody tell me what that is? Everything's live?
So on the split screen, you can see the agenda, but you can also see other agendas at the top of the screen. So it's kind of split. I don't know why they call it split screen, but that's just the name that's been assigned to it.
Yeah, because it seems like the split screen only has that one little section, because I've always gone to the other one, because I found the split screen a little confusing. But now that I'm actually in it and bouncing around, I can see it takes me to certain sections, not the whole document, but it takes me to certain sections. So
that's helpful. Thank you.
Sections,
yeah.
But not the whole document.
That's very helpful. I hadn't really understood that, and I will look there next time. Thank you.
So, for example, the split screen might be good for the links for just the sections we want to focus on, so you don't have to read through the whole document, but we can go to those sections, and those are what we review. I could see that being very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks. I didn't really understand the split screen either, but I do.
Yeah, that's typically what I use for these meetings, is to help go through everything.
See, aren't you guys glad that I'm willing to fess up look what we all learned.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah. And it was a big packet this week, but it would be great to look at these documents more thoroughly. I'll admit too that I only got to sort of glance through and look for some key items in the complete streets policy that I wanted to discuss. And I do have one topic for discussion. It's one that caught my eye before. So at the risk of being a broken record, on page 240, the exceptions. And then I was thinking about asking you about those in relationship to the context sensitivity, which I know is important. It's on page 243 of the packet. And the reason I'm bringing it up for discussion and want to hear more from you and maybe John is that we create these policies and they're really important to us. And God dang it, somebody finds a way to get around them, or somebody finds a way to not do them. And so I want to see if I can set up a fortress of, yeah, let's have complete streets and how can we have them? And I wanted to make sure that you were confident with the language in both these things and how they work together to create variability, maybe not the variability we desire. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. No, we actually feel very confident with it. I mean, we started with recommended language that came from our consultant, and then we worked with all the different staff that have to either work with private developers or work on our own projects to determine the type of exceptions that typically come up, and to make sure that we're not allowing loopholes so anyone could go around any of these exceptions and not implement complete streets. Most projects are typically a negotiation process, so a lot of it has to deal with the staff enforcing it too, more so than what the language says. And we're pretty confident in our staff being really good negotiators when it comes to talking about how projects should be moving forward, but also being very sensitive to the type of policies that we're trying to stick to, particularly because the Mobility Master Plan and the Complete Streets policy are brand new. And so even though transportation staff are probably the most up to date on it, I'll be going to each of the departments around a lot of new policy language that's coming from the Mobility Master Plan and any other policy updates to let them know what's updated, how we can use it, and to talk to them particularly around issues that they see that might come up, so that we can particularly fix that in the future.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you had anything to add.
Well, just in that, I think one of the things you said inspired me to point out that sometimes the staff needs, when you talk about enforcement, they need something really strong to enforce it. And that's why we talked about the shall and will words rather than the shoulds, because the shoulds never get you anywhere. And so really glad to see more of those sort of phrasings, and just hope that the whole staff can agree that they stand very strong with the language that's in those two sections.
Right. And the reason why we have, a whole section on exceptions is because, not every situation is perfect where we can implement everything we want. And so we need to be able to have language available that we can work with, not necessarily that allows someone to bypass it completely, but at least to work with them on how to stick to what the policy is trying to achieve.
Thank you, Stephen. Anybody else have anything else that popped into their brain to discuss? Sujata, it's yours.
Thank you. I have a question about definitions, and specifically the definition of all users. And I apologize because I'm sure we talked about this before, but I, for the life of me, cannot remember what that conversation entailed. So I apologize. But one of the things I was noticing, so the all ages and abilities, I guess the question becomes, and maybe this is just too much in the weeds in my background, with the regional trails, is so we always talk about all ages and abilities. And when we're talking about all ages and abilities, there's that real intent around, the less than 5% grade and 2% cross slope for ADA to meet those ADA requirements. And so when I see our complete streets network defining all ages and abilities, because in a lot of cases when you're in the road right of way, it's different because you have that waiver because, when streets go up hills, your sidewalks can go up hills. And so you don't have that same sort of level of requirement. And so I'm just, and maybe it's because that's non-motorized and this is motorized. And so you're in a different section of ASHTO or whatever it may be. But I just, we want to see streets where people feel comfortable walking and people feel comfortable biking, but we also don't want to wind up in scenarios where we're raising our, like flattening mountains or, having to alter our landscape to such an extent to sort of meet, requirements that maybe that is not the right place for. So can you just talk to me a little bit about that definition of all ages? And just making sure that we're compatible, like as much as we can.
Sure.
We want to achieve that need, but like on my hill, I cannot even imagine what an all ages ability sidewalk would look like. So just just want to make sure we're not getting into a scenario that we can't implement.
Sure. The discussions that we previously had on at least the definitions page, particularly around all ages and abilities and the users, was really so that we can highlight who's typically the users that aren't mentioned when we have these conversations. And that's why we wanted to highlight them, particularly so that no one tries to find a loophole around trying to make in terms of like looking for exceptions. And all ages and abilities doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to make everything ADA compliant. It just means we're going to go to the best of our ability to do that within the means that within the situation that we're trying to look at. And for very steep hills that aren't typically ADA compliant, particularly yours, what is ADA compliant is to be able to put some type of facility every certain number of feet as kind of a resting spot. And that is in the means of being able to get to all ages and abilities, to get to the populations that are typically not designed for in traditional transportation. And so we want to make sure that that's included in these definitions. And that's most of what the board has discussed, is making sure that we are highlighting a lot of those populations.
Thank you.
That was a super question, Sujata. Thank you so much and a good discussion. Cynthia, do you
question.
have anything?
Yeah, I just this is my broken record thing as always. With regard to bicyclists under all users, is it make any sense, or are other transportation professionals breaking out the needs of different levels of cyclists? I know we've seen different, profiles, graphics of different profiles, but I've seen situations that got built out because somebody had a vision of what was good for a cyclist, but it really wasn't good. It actually puts certain cyclists in a dangerous position because of the interface with the intersections, because they just thought everybody should be on the sidewalk. And, so I know it can be if it's overlooked or someone has a particular idea in mind and they're not thinking about all cyclists, they can make a mistake and build things that are not safe. So do you have any way of parsing that, or is that something that is beyond scope?
For this policy, yes, you can parse them out. And we actually do that in the mobility master plan.
Right, I know that.
And that was part of the reason why we didn't want to do it here, is because you would typically have competing language if you were included. And we also didn't necessarily need to actually go to that level of detail on bicyclists. You actually typically want to just say bicycle facilities as part of the complete streets, so that can incorporate trails or bike lanes or protected bike lanes and any other type of bike facility. Just because the language that you often see is bike lane, and that really narrows down what you can do if you're just sticking to a bike lane. And so we're actually trying to broaden the language to let everybody know that it's not just a bike lane that we're looking for. In fact, more often than that, I'm not looking for a bike lane. I'm looking for some type of protected facility. And that is also the reason why we went into that level of detail in the mobility master plan, because we're going to be implementing it through that anyway. Did that answer your question, Cynthia?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are there any other discussion items about the Complete Streets policy update? I don't see any. And so, as Stephen said earlier, we are expected to see this in November. So there won't be quite a big a gap between seeing it the last time and seeing it the next time, right?
Is that what the board would like to see is at the November meeting, looking for taking action on the Complete Streets policy draft?
Well, for me, that depends also on what else we have necessary to do in that meeting or by the end of the year, and as long as there's time to do it. So if we have something that is getting near finished and we have the whole document in this packet, right? So we don't have to wait for the November packet to be studying it and working on it. So we can more at our own pace pick this up between now and the November meeting and review it and tabulate our questions. If we do talk about it at the November meeting, do you want us to submit questions and comments in the intervening time by email to you, or just save them for the meeting?
Actually, prior to the meeting would be helpful, and then I'll summarize all the edits at the meeting. That we can be efficient with the meeting time.
Go for it, Tom.
Question then for you is, when would you like comments back? Because I was thinking I would try and review it in the next day or two to get it back by Friday, but if it's in general, and if we're going to be talking about the comments that we have at the next meeting, but get them to you ahead of time, is there a good time frame that we should make sure we shoot for?
Could we aim for the end of next week? So that
What's the
by
date?
October 23rd?
23rd, right?
Sounds good. Everybody okay with that? Everybody's writing that down. Okay, so we will email you, Stephen, our comments and concerns or questions.
That's primarily
by
in the
October
complete streets
23rd
section.
for Complete
Sure.
Streets. Okay, I think we're
So
done.
I'm
with
sorry
that.
if it's silly. Maybe this is a dumb question. I'm not tracking well enough, but we would be making a decision in November about what to transmit to council, a recommendation to council, but it would be basically the same content, right? You don't have more work to do.
Well, that depends on your comments.
Besides comments from us, but you're not.
Yes.
Yes. So, okay. Thanks.
Okay, I think we are closing the.
Sujata,
Yes,
did you have a
Tom?
question?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Sujata, go.
Sorry, really quick. So just to clarify what you were saying earlier when we started this conversation, we're not going to include the full policy in the master plan. In the master plan, what we're going to do is sort of reference that there is a policy, reference where you can go in code to find the policy, but then the policy will only be sort of living in one place, correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, ready to move on? Are you ready to move on, Stephen?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is the Transportation Advisory Board 2020 and 2021 schedule. And by golly, we go back to Stephen to do our senior transportation planner.
So actually for this next item, I'm actually going to introduce our new transportation manager, John Mortensen, and ask him to go over the schedule with the board. He's going to be a regular at our meetings now, and so I figured this would be a great opportunity for him to talk with the board about our work.
Welcome, John.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here at your meeting. As Stephen mentioned, I've replaced Kurt as the Transportation Engineering Manager, and so I'll be attending these meetings all of them. And so we're going to talk about the remainder of the 2020 schedule and the 2021 schedule. And I'm going to share my screen because I pulled up the part from the agenda. And let me know if you guys can see this. Okay. All right. And I went down here to the bottom so that way we could talk about next November. We've got a meeting currently scheduled for November 23rd. And so I did want to bring up that is the Monday before Thanksgiving if we wanted to talk about moving it or leave it on that date. But the items for that agenda are the 2021 work plan, which we'll talk about a little bit here in a couple minutes, and the rest of the complete streets policy update that Stephen just went over. And then we could also talk about whether we wanted to have a December meeting, and if we did, what we would want to talk about. And so I guess at this point, I'll just bring up the question, do we want to keep the date of November 23rd, or which is the Monday before Thanksgiving, or try and look for an alternative date?
For me, since we're not traveling anywhere at Thanksgiving this year, it works for me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, since we're home. Just canceled our trip, so.
I'm a solid maybe, but if we're doing it by Zoom, that helps.
Yeah, I would agree with Cynthia that having if it's an online meeting, it is much easier to work into whatever schedule would be that week, and it is not like most Thanksgiving weeks. And when you do ask, though, you don't yet have an alternative for us to consider if we did move it from that date, or do you?
It would likely be the either Tuesday or Wednesday the week before. So it would.
The 16th or 17th.
I could do either of those too.
17th or 18th.
Both of those are open for me.
If we do decide, yeah, the week before, then the 17th works, the 18th doesn't.
Okay.
+1 on that. It's the exact same thing for me.
Yeah, 17th. Work if we don't do it the 23rd.
How about the 19th? Thursdays tend to be easier to schedule.
Thursday
19th.
works for me as well, just not the Tuesday.
Okay.
Or not the Wednesday.
Tom, the 19th, Thursday?
Yeah, the 19th should work also.
Cynthia, did you vote? Good. Okay, 17th, 19th, or 23rd. Just get to us as soon as possible. I would prefer to have it the week before. I'll say, is anybody else like me that they'd prefer to have it the week before the Thanksgiving week? Well, two of us.
50%.
So,
Me.
Okay, 75%.
Okay, we'll leave it to you guys to finalize that because I know you have to schedule it around a bunch of other things. But maybe if you could move it up to the 19th, we'd.
Yeah. And the other is on December the 21st. That's the first week of school break for the school district. If that affects anybody or not.
Oh, the December meeting that's a typo. It's supposed to be listed the 28th.
Oh, 28th. Oh, okay.
That's good.
Does that date work for everyone?
My birthday.
Oh,
Go to a
no.
meeting on my birthday.
Happy birthday.
No.
But you can't move it around me, but
Well,
Actually, if we could not do it between Christmas and New Year, that would be ideal. Not that we're going to be traveling anywhere, most likely, but just, you forget what day of the week it is. And
especially if it's your birthday.
Usually the week between Christmas
It'll be
and
Cynthia's
New Year's.
birthday. We'll all be celebrating. So
Usually the week between Christmas and New Year's is off and the computers are off for us. So
I'll turn it back to John to talk about kind of the agenda and whether or not we actually want to keep that meeting, because that was something that the board had decided last year is actually not to have the meetings in November and December because of the proximity to the holidays.
We had no idea what we were in store
But
for.
if we move November up a week, we could move December possibly up a week if we needed to have that meeting in December. That could be one option.
Well, John, tell it like it is. Do we have to have a December meeting, or are we going to pay? Are we going to pay later? Pay it now or pay later? If we
Well, I think we'd be fine skipping it. The number one reason I could see to have one is to throw a birthday party, but I think that's outside the scope of the tab.
I do have friends. You know? I do have a question.
Yes.
And maybe you covered this already. 50% chance of everything I asked you've already covered. Stephen, you know I've mentioned this before. So we're talking about the work plan. And this work plan, what I'm not clear on, I'm seeing this on each of these dates. What is there to talk about? Because we don't, who sets our work plan? The needs of what has to be decided sets our work plan. Council is asked us
Right.
to provide recommendations, so they should obviously be buying into what they want recommendations about. So I'm just trying to figure out what exactly is to be discussed and decided on the work plan.
For the work plan, I mean, a lot of 2021 is already mostly figured out, pending anything else happening next year. So the schedule that we'll talk about in a minute, or at least the topics that our staff has kind of mapped that out the best we can in accordance with how or when we think we could bring those topics eventually to City Council. And so we've planned it accordingly for the board to discuss prior to taking those topics to City Council. With that said, throughout any time of the year, City Council can ask the board to make for any type of feedback on any other topic that's not on the schedule. So that's why we're not overly, adding so much to each month, is because we want to leave a little bit of buffer, and likely the schedule will change throughout the year as we kind of go through each of the topics and things kind of get moved around.
I guess what it doesn't sound like we need a tab meeting to set the tab work plan. That gets set, that's driven by processes outside of this group's purpose. I mean,
we still have to discuss the topics before a recommendation is or some type of draft is sent to the mayor, who eventually approves it.
Approves our work plan?
Correct.
So
I'm just saying, how much input do tab members have into the work plan? It sounds like the work plan's driven by the things that need to be decided.
Most of it is, but we can still take board feedback on the type of items they need to see, because yes, we have 2021 kind of mapped out, but as we go through each of the topics, maybe you're going to need an extra meeting on one type of item, or maybe you need, to supplement our transit system discussions. Maybe you need a meeting where we have a presentation from Metro and Sun Transit staff.
I get you. Okay.
So there is some flexibility in there.
So I was wondering if the council has a meeting in November, if we meet after that to answer or discuss any questions that they might have, that'd be part of the purpose of the November meeting. And then if we cover that in November, maybe there's not the need to meet in December, and then in January too.
Potentially.
Okay.
And we're discussing the work plan tonight, and we still have plenty of time to do that. So I don't know that as John said, I don't know that there's going to be a need for a December meeting unless it kind of gets to that situation where City Council has several questions, which we could always address in January as well.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, Sujata, go ahead.
I have another question. Tom's like, or John is wondering if he's ever going to actually get to the work plan. But the other question, as far as membership of our advisory, I noticed it wasn't on the agenda. So is that something because who knows, maybe in December we're having and welcome to the advisory board party. I don't know, but just wondering sort of what that's looking like, or if we are going to talk about it later in the agenda.
I was going to talk about it later when we
Okay.
get to the staff reports. I'll
Okay,
have a little more
awesome.
information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I switched our screen over to show the tentative 2021 tab schedule. And the first item up in mid-January is a special board meeting for board training that we'll have. And then after that, the big push is for the Transportation Improvement Program update. And I should back up a little bit. When Stephen is talking about the implementing the MMP, he had a really good slide that showed basically what this table or this web page shows in a little bit more slick manner. So the TIP update, that's the big thing that'll take us to probably about June or so. And in addition to that, we've got a little bit of time to talk about the complete streets policy update in January, and then to talk about the pedestrian crossing guidelines in April. And then in May, we'll continue the pedestrian crossing guidelines update and begin talking about the street standards. And then that would carry over, the street standards would carry over to June. And then July, we're showing the discussing the transit system and to talk about traffic calming and to continue those two topics through September. And also in September, add in more street standards updates. And then a year from now, talk about the 2022 work plan and continue talking about the street standards update. And then in November, continue talking about the 2022 board work plan and reviewing the mobility master plan. And then the same thing for the December meeting if we have that next year. We've got a couple things that are listed here for additional topics that could be requested by the board at any time, which would be updates from Metro and Sound Transit, coordination with the schools, the trail system update, and the transportation demand management update. And then we've thought ahead of the 2022 to talk about transit some more, continue updating the street standards, because that's something, as Stephen mentioned, we last did in 2010. We're going to start doing every year now, which is a good practice to do. Talk about high capacity transit and a neighborhood improvement program proposal, and talk about the city's concurrency management system. And so with that, are there any comments or questions over the 2021 Transportation Advisory Board schedule?
I'm not seeing anyone.
None for me.
Anybody? I like how we have what looks like some momentum on topics with repeated and successive meetings talking about one topic in a monthly fashion. Let's just hope we're going to be able to stick to this meeting schedule. This last year was so difficult, but this looks great.
Thanks.
And so the board knows I added the complete streets policy for January, assuming with the assumption that potentially November and December might get canceled. So that would probably go away if we do talk about this in November.
Sounds good. I think that does it for the, what was that, 2021 schedule. You all done, John?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for being here. It's really fun to have you in this capacity. I've always loved working with you before, and it's fun to have you sitting beside us here. And so now for the rest of the meeting, we have a couple things. One was that we bumped the approval of the minutes of our August and September meetings to a later time in the meeting to see if Marisol, another member, was going to show up, and she has not yet. And so I'm going to look again to Stephen because he knows more about our membership and quorum requirements. And this is when we take action on the approval of minutes, it's one of those things. Can we do that tonight?
We would need to postpone the approval of the minutes until the next meeting.
Okay. Well, then that's what we'll do. We gave it a try. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so then we'll move into the next section of the meeting, our reports. And first on that is the staff report. I turn to Stephen for that. Go ahead, Stephen.
Great, thank you. For the staff report tonight, the first item is actually a request from the executive office for the board to comment on the recovery task force for the pandemic. The ask is that the board identify tasks or tasks that the city can accomplish between January and June of next year to further the road to recovery. And they're asking for feedback before January 8th. So another reason to meet next month. So that would be an item we can add to the agenda for discussion. There is a YouTube video for the last recovery task force meeting that would it might be interesting to watch to kind of give it ideas. But what I'll do is I'll bring some staff ideas for at least to start the discussion for the board. And then we'll take any feedback you have and bring that back to the executive office to give to the recovery task force.
Stephen, is this related to the meeting in November with the recovery task force?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. So as part of that, the chairs of each of the boards and commissions have been invited to a joint meeting with the recovery task force in November 12th. To kind of help start those conversations, but they're still asking all the boards to have this item on their agendas for their next meetings for discussion. So this is just kind of a heads up that for our November meeting, we'll have this on the agenda, and to think about it in terms of what we want to say as part of the Transportation Advisory Board. Any questions on that? Actually, okay. The other item is John, our new transportation manager, who will now be a regular for our meetings. I already introduced him, so I won't talk too much, but I'm happy to see John get kind of advance to the transportation manager position and kind of be part of our team here at the board. The update for the public works director is that hiring process is underway. We had interviews last Friday. And so we're waiting to hear back to see what the next step is on follow-up interviews to kind of conclude that process. But the idea is that we'll have a new director selected, I think, by the end of this month, I believe, and potentially on board by December is the hope at the latest. And then for board recruitment, originally, we were going to start recruitment this month in conjunction with recruitment for the new environmental board that's coming up. But that process was postponed a little bit. So right now we're looking at starting recruitment in early November. I've already started to reach out to people to kind of gauge interest out in the community. So if you know of anybody that might be interested, I'd be happy to reach out to them as well. The applications won't be available until early November at the earliest, but I'm at least trying to reach out to people to figure out if what the interest is in the community. And then the idea with recruitment in November is we would push for appointments in December. So they would start with us actually potentially at the December meeting, depending on when the city council meeting is or when the mayor finalizes the appointments, or they would join us for the training in January, which right now we're looking at 2 meetings in January, one for board training to kind of walk everyone through and meet the new members, and then we'll have our regular meeting at the end of January.
I have a question about this, about recruitment.
Yes.
And maybe Sujata does too, because she asked about it earlier. So let me go to Sujata first. Do you have a question at all about recruitment? You just wanted to hear the report. Okay. And my question has to do with the youth appointments. Do we recruit them just like we recruit everyone else, or is there some kind of method to that?
What do you mean?
Well, in the way we recruit everyone else, but we send out notices and we ask the public, whether you're interested in it. And then you or I might have somebody we know who has experience and could be an asset on the board. But when we go to recruit the youth, I'm thinking of the youth resources that our community has. For instance, in Issaquah Highlands, we have a Highlands Youth Board of a number of leaders who could have someone who would like to serve the community this way. And I wondered if I could extend an invitation to that organization. And then we have the other Issaquah Youth Board and those other things. That's my question.
Absolutely. When the applications become available, I'll send a link to everyone who you can send it to whoever you want for board commission applications. Anyone can apply, and to answer your question, yes, the youth recruitment will be part of that process. It's not just an automatic selection from any particular group. I reach out to the career counselors at the high school. I'll reach out to the youth advisory board and to anyone else that people suggest or suggest that I should contact. So it is just full recruitment for all of the open positions. And then Sujata, you had a question about the video.
Oh, this was about the recovery task force video.
Oh,
I think
got
you
it.
mentioned that there was a YouTube video online.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes, I'll send out.
Sort of understand the scope and breadth of what they have been discussing, or get the juices flowing.
Yes, yeah. I'll send out the link to the latest task force meeting for everybody to watch, and I think it's helpful to kind of hear everybody's comments of what type of information they're looking for. At the last meeting, they talked quite a bit about mobility, and just showing what kind of interest is in terms of like what does recovery look like for transit use, or what does recovery look like for low income population that don't have access to any transit or any other means to get around. So we'll have those discussions in November, and I'll bring that kind of list of items from the task force, but any items that the staff can come up with for us to discuss as well.
Okay, yeah, because the other thing I was wondering about is, as we're going through and starting to think through, I think when we finalized our master plan kind of vision for the community and our priorities, I think those values kind of align with and hopefully align with what we would have envisioned sort of smart recovery for our city looking like. But I'm more curious to make sure that, like just kind of thinking about like what we did with Gilman and closing down Gilman, so there could be, more opportunity for businesses and that sort of thing. So as these recovery items are coming out, is there anything we should be thinking about as we're looking? Because I don't think economic opportunity was necessarily one of our priorities in our master plan, but I'm just wondering if there are some strong recommendations coming out of, we all want to see our city recover and thrive. And so if there are any strong recommendations coming out of that task force, just ensuring that we know that that could potentially affect the tip or whatever, just knowing what those are so we can make sure that we're cognizant of that as we're thinking through how we want to, stack rank our 2021 kind of budget priorities.
Sure.
So it's more just kind of timing on that sort of stuff. Because I mean, again, I don't know what the level of recommendations are, but it'd be something to consider.
So the recovery task force did provide recommendations for dealing with the pandemic. This next set of recommendations will be post recovery. So what kind of items should the city be? What kind of items can the city be working on post recovery? Assuming we're now in recovery mode starting in January. So we'll kind of see what hoping it is, but yes, So we'll have, like I said, we'll have that discussion next month. I'll send out the link to the task force meeting, and I'll also send out the link to the recommendations the task force previously made to City Council, just to kind of help fill that context for you. And that, if there are no other questions about recruitment, that concludes the staff reports.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Stephen. The stuff you're getting done, and I really appreciate it. Now, the next is the chair report. I have no report. And the next is the youth report. And we don't have any youth today, so no youth report.
Speak for yourself. Aren't we all very
Young at heart? Yeah.
That's right. All right. Yeah, I did. I spoke too soon. The youngest in the room counts, right? And young at heart. So then the next item is the other business. I think we already talked about this, but why don't we, since it's always at the end of the meeting, recap the possibilities for the November meeting and how you intend to let us know and when you'll let us know when the November meeting is.
Well, so did we actually settle on trying to push the meeting to the prior week? Okay, so I'll follow up tomorrow actually with a meeting invite and confirm that one of those days will work best for us, and then send out the WebEx invite.
Excellent. I think that everybody was available that's in the room here on the 17th and the 19th.
I think Thursdays tend to be easiest to schedule because there's not a lot of other meetings going on, so there won't be any conflicts with any public meetings going on. So I'll probably be aiming for that one on the 19th.
Great. Good to know.
And I was just going to repeat, I think that what we heard was we could, if the 17th or 19th don't work, we could do that Monday, the 23rd. So that wasn't off the table. It was just not as preferred. Am I correct?
Right, because we're all going out for a beer with you on that day.
Yes. I think that's
No,
right.
different month. You get your mixing. Your,
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm missing up the birthday month.
And then I'll confirm with Marisol to make sure that she's able to attend the next meeting as well.
Yes. Yes, very good. Okay, well, I think that's it. Stephen or John, is there anything else tonight?
No, that was it. Just confirming the November meeting and the rest of the work plan.
Ah, well, if there are no objections, I'm looking around at the friendly faces here and don't see any. I will adjourn this meeting at 7:23. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you in
Great.
November.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Cynthia.